Everybody, here on the YouTube channel. Of course, you listen to us on audio podcast as well. We're going to kick off previewing the NFL divisions. We're going to start off in the NFC East, and doing that with me today is Brian Manning. You can check him out. He is the managing editor over at Commanders Wire, part of USA Today, and also college football side of things. He is the site manager for Gobbler Country, covering Virginia Tech. And Brian, I appreciate you taking time to come on the show, come on the channel to talk about the NFC East.
Thank you, Phillip. It's always a pleasure.
Yeah, it's been a while since we've done this. I believe first time we've done this with video, and I
Mhm.
just want to say, with this division, I was kind of prepping and kind of reading different things. Is this the worst division in the NFL, or is it? Does somebody else have that distinction?
Um, I always tend to think that the AFC South might be worse, but yeah, it's the worst in the NFC. So,
Well, here's a way to really do that. You take who could be the last two place teams versus the AFC South last two place teams. The Texans and the Jaguars versus last year would be the Commanders and the Giants. I would take the Commanders over any of those other two.
oh
So
yeah,
I do think you have to put the AFC South below the NFC East.
agreed. Yeah,
Which, anytime you have a team coached by Urban Meyer in NFL, they're not going to be all that good. I just had to get my anytime I could get a Urban Meyer shot in, I'm going to take it because not the biggest fan of that guy, but I have to say that stuff when I get to whenever I get to the AFC South. Uh, this division, it is an interesting division. A lot of interesting teams. I think there's a lot of interesting things with all these teams, and like I let everybody know, this is about a 25. We're gonna try not to go past 30 minutes. Try my videos not to go past 30 minutes. So we're not gonna go by every position. We're not gonna go break it down like that, but kind of hit the high spots on all these teams. And we're gonna go alphabetical order on all these previews for the divisions. And obviously, we're gonna start with the Dallas Cowboys. Listen, me and you were just off the air talking. Of course, I cover Auburn for Last One College Football about dead coach walking. I think Cowboys are in that situation this year with Mike McCarthy. That's my thoughts on the Cowboys. With now Sean Payton out there, I know that he's still under contract with the Saints. So if the Cowboys were to go get him, they'd have to give the Saints. I just feel like that has a lot of smoke with Sean Payton and the Cowboys. I feel like this is going to be it for Mike McCarthy. I believe he is on the biggest hot seat, perhaps, in the NFC East.
yeah. Mike McCarthy could actually lead Dallas to the Super Bowl, and if he doesn't win, I could still see him getting fired because I think they like Dan Quinn, who's the defensive coordinator. They
That's
don't
true
want to
too.
lose him. They like Kellen Moore. You know how Jerry likes to promote those homegrown offensive coordinators that used to play quarterback for him. And then you have, of
Mhm.
course, Sean Payton. Those are three to Jerry are three enticing options. So yeah, I think McCarthy's as good as gone.
This team too. I think they got worse in the offseason. Losing Amari Cooper is one. Um, I mean, I know he was on the decline as a receiver. He wasn't as good as he once was, but still losing that piece. Michael Gallup coming off and an Achilles injury. They bring in James Washington, Cedric Wilson, another receiver left in free agency. And I know they put in a lot on Dak Prescott. Now it's going to be time. Okay, it's time for you to act like a top 5, top 10 quarterback because you're being paid like one. But I feel like offensively, Dallas kind of got worse than it all season. And Ezekiel Elliott, he's another player that's declining. So the offense does not look as on paper as daunting as it maybe it did going into last season.
No, I completely agree with you. Ezekiel Elliott shouldn't be on the roster at this point. Tony Pollard's a better player
Mm-hmm.
at receiver. Cooper often had disappearing acts. I mean, he would go 4 or 5 games without a catch or with minimal impact. Raiders fans know all about that, but yeah, he's still a really good player, and he was his Dak Prescott's career kind of went to the next level when he got Amari Cooper a few years ago, and I wonder how that'll affect Dak. But yeah, Gallup's a good player, and they're hoping that CD Lamb's ready to take that next step as the number one receiver, and which I think he does have that ability, but you're placing a lot on Michael Gallup to move up, and which I think he can also. But losing Cooper's a big deal, and you said Cedric Wilson. Cedric Wilson's a really good player as well. Um, and then they got tied in. They got Dalton Schultz, who's on that 1 year tag. I think the offensive line. They lost Lyle Collins, which I mean I don't know that that's a really big loss, but and the whole I think they took a step back, but they're in the NFC East, so and there's that extra playoff spot now, so they may be okay.
Yeah, everybody gets into playoffs now. It's
It's
you
a
get a
but
playoff spot.
sorry, Bill, but I was going to say that defense. I think the defense also. I wonder how can they repeat how good they were last year. We know Micah Parsons will.
Yeah, that's the thing. That was the big thing. Surprise with the Cowboys. I mean, when you look at the numbers, they were in a lot of numbers. They were middle of the pack, but they caused a lot of turnovers, which Trayvon Diggs had a lot to do with that. And my thing, he had 11 interceptions, but he also allowed over 1,000 yards receivers on him. So yes, he gets the interceptions, but also maybe he goes for that too much. He's high risk, high rewards with the way he plays. And I'm a believer if you're big on turnovers, and that was like the key part of your defense. I don't think that's something you need to rely on year in, year out. Like that's hard to repeat the next year. Just hey, what if you don't get all those turnovers? And your defense is maybe not as good, but they have a lot of good centerpieces there. Like DeMarcus Lawrence, he's still there. I mean, they do lose Randy Gregory, which is a big loss. He's going to Denver. But like I said, Micah Parsons. I mean, the guy's all over the field. He's a big game changer for them. But you're right, Dan Quinn. Obviously, his name was mentioned for some jobs because of what that Cowboy defense did. But what else do you see with the Cowboys defense, going into this year, trying to repeat or get better? Because like I said, I just don't believe you can rely on turnovers like they did last year.
No, I think teams that rely on turnovers are always going to regress because you can't maintain that type of pace. And they may prove me wrong. There's no way Trayvon Diggs gets 11 interceptions again. And that guy would continuously get beat last year. And but when you get there, but all people want to talk about was the interceptions. And there's more to being a good corner than just picking off a lot of passes. I mean, not to say he's an ascending player. I do believe he can be a really good player, but I think he may be a bit overrated based on the interceptions. And Micah Parsons, I mean, he may already be the best defensive player in the league. I mean, he's unbelievable. Their defensive line, they just seem to always, it's especially as a tackle positions, they always just seem to find guys. I think the Randy Gregory loss because for years he was kind of just disappointment. Last year he turned it on. He was available. That's his biggest thing, and he was really good. And I don't know that DeMarcus Lawrence is quite the same player he used to be. And they basically chose Lawrence over Gregory when you think about it. But they did make a great offer to Gregory, but he chose Denver.
Yeah, everybody's wanting to go to the AFC West all of a sudden. It seems like in the NFL, with Diggs, and I just thought about this, and a lot of people know I bring up this a lot. Anybody that watches or listens to anything I do, I bring this moment up a lot. You can sum up his season last year in two plays. It's an example of his whole year against the Patriots. The pick six against Mac Jones, and in the very following play, what happens? He gets beat on a play. Mac Jones, I forget who the receiver was off the top of my head, but he gets beat very next play for a touchdown. So that's kind of like Trayvon Diggs last year in the next year. He makes the big interception, returns it for a touchdown, but then he gets beat. So he is a great playmaking corner off of last season. But once again, talk about he is not the shutdown corner. I think that's what Dallas is going to need him to turn into for their defense to take that next step too.
Agreed, yeah.
So next we get to talk about the New York Giants, and I don't know where it is to go. I guess the good thing is they have a new coach, Brian Daboll. I like him, but I don't know. With Daniel Jones, he's obviously they haven't put a lot of talent around him. I know that, but when you look at the Giants, just with this whole franchise, what comes to mind when I say New York Giants in 2022?
I think they're going to be better this year because they've invested a lot in the line of scrimmage. In the draft, you saw two of the top 7 picks there were offensive and defensive linemen. Andrew Thomas is turning into a pretty good offensive lineman. Leonard Williams is solid. I think Leonard Williams is a little bit overrated, but he's still a good player. I think they're going to be better this year. But they're not a contender yet. They're still a draft or two away, but if I were a Giants fan, I would be excited about the GM and coach there now because I think they finally saw the light there with the whole Gettleman thing and just a disastrous last couple of eras there with the Giants. But I would be really excited about the Giants. Maybe not this year, But as far as Daniel Jones, it's hard to get excited about him. But I've seen him do some really good things, but he just can't sustain it. They've got a lot of money tied up in the receiver position, and really they haven't produced. And Galladay to me was a disappointment last year. Sterling Shepard's a really good player. He's not a number one, but he's a really good player. And then Kadarius Toney. I mean, there's talent there. So it's really up to Daniel Jones this year.
And, with them, when you look at the playmakers around him, they've had an issue obviously with Saquon Barkley. You know what his ability is when he's on the field, but him being on the field has been the big question. He's stayed injured. He's had injury problems. Galladay was hurt last year. I mean, it seemed like the surrounding cast around Daniel Jones. I remember last year's game was kind of going to the week. You're like, who's going to catch passes in the game for the Giants? So that's a big issue too, around Daniel Jones. Yes, he's not lived up to being the sixth player picked in the 2019 draft, but also, when your receivers and your running backs are always getting hurt, that also, kind of hurts you too.
I definitely agree with you.
And I kind of wonder and get your thoughts on this. And before I say what I'm about to say, I want everybody watching or listening to this. I am not comparing Daniel Jones to Josh Allen, but we have seen Daniel Jones' running ability, how he can be a good runner. I kind of wonder with what Brian Daboll did with Josh Allen in the running facet of the running game. I'm kind of curious what he's going to do with Daniel Jones too.
Yeah, the first game against Washington last year, Daniel Jones was phenomenal, and part of it was because of his legs. And everybody makes fun of that clip from a couple of years ago where he was running down the field by himself and he tripped up, but it was a pretty good run up until that point.
Yeah, so, it was.
He's actually, I think there's something there. I don't know if he's already too damaged, and I don't know what his ceiling actually is, but I do think there's some talent there.
Yeah, which I now know that the wrong person's going to listen to this and have Josh Allen, Daniel Jones, same quarterback.
Yeah, I knew you weren't saying that. I know what you're doing the Brian Daboll thing. I know what you were trying to do. So.
Yeah, well, the internet people, see that they take it another direction. Anyways, come at me. P. Jordan, SEC. I love to talk to you. But defensively, of course, they draft Kayvon Thibodeau, which I know some people were knocking him going into the draft. He kind of didn't land as up close to the top as everybody thought. Yeah, defensively, I mean, they're going to have to fix some issues there too as well. They're not a team that gets to the quarterback or did not get to the quarterback very well. So that's obviously a need they had, and it's on the defense side of the ball. It's going to be key for them as well.
Yeah, I believe so. They have Thibodeau and Ojulari now to rush the passer, and that's a good start. Their secondary, I'm not too sure about their secondary. They cut their best corner, so I think there's an issue there. But I think the Giants realize they know they're not contending this year, so it's all about getting the house cleaned up for next year and beyond, getting that salary cap in shape.
Kind of back to Daniel Jones, which I guess is a big question, and actually be a question I have with Philadelphia Eagles for you. So next year, NFL draft, are they drafting another quarterback?
Probably. Yeah.
Yeah. I agree with you on that one. Just kind of feel like, like I said, damage. I mean, Ken Daboll, if he has a rebound with Daniel Jones, it will be an incredible coaching job. Philadelphia Eagles, 9-8 last year, made the playoffs, got beat by Tampa Bay in the first round there. But I think that's a very misleading playoff team. They were 3-6 at one point, then they went 6-2. But no wins, no gains in that 6-2 stretch against playoff teams. So they were beating up on some bad football teams throughout that stretch. And it looked like to me this is a make or break year potentially for Jalen Hurts because he has shown some good things. And I think he works best when you kind of use him like maybe Baltimore uses Lamar Jackson. They go get A.J. Brown for him. He has Devontae Smith, his former teammate at Alabama. But what is your read on Jalen Hurts as a quarterback going into this year? How big of a year is it for him for the Philadelphia Eagles?
It's definitely a big year. They traded they were stacked in the draft this year, moved and traded more for next year because I really believe they think we're going to build up around him so there's no excuses. he's got this year to prove himself, where they got so much ammunition next year. They can go up and get anybody they want next year. So it's definitely a huge year for him. And as far as who he is as a quarterback, I don't know. I've seen flashes of just brilliance and flashes of just like a backup. Definitely a long way to go. With A.J. Brown and not Zach Ertz, Dallas Goedert and Devontae Smith, he's got some pretty nice weapons there. So he really has no excuses this year. So he better make the playoffs. And I think they had an aggressive offseason. So they'll be disappointed if they're not winning 11 games and winning the division. There's going to be some shakeup there, not with coaching or anything. Just I definitely would believe they would go for a different quarterback.
Yeah, and if he does struggle, the Eagles do have 2 first-round draft picks in the 2023 draft. So, I mean, that's huge there as well, because you could use one of those picks on a quarterback. And, talking about quarterback too, obviously they were not a good team getting quarterback. We talked about that with the Giants, but the Eagles were really bad. They were 31st in the NFL last year. You only sacked the quarterback 29 times. They had a 10th ranked defense in the league, but obviously we know it's about getting to the quarterback. And they gave up the 69% completion percentage, which if you can't get to the quarterback, it's easier for the quarterback to complete passes. So I actually don't blame that on the secondary on teams. If your front can't get there, eventually guys are going to get open. But they did go out and get Hassan Riddick, so it does seem like they are addressing that need to get to the quarterback, and kind of force that issue to help out their secondary.
And then they got Jordan Davis, the big boy from Georgia, who's I'm still wondering, is he going to be as impactful? Because he didn't play it. I mean, he wasn't an every down player at Georgia, so you wonder if he's going to be. Were the workouts overhyping him a little bit, maybe? But I mean, man, there's a lot to work with there to be excited about if you're the Eagles. And as far as they reminded me last year of a little bit of the 2020 Washington team that didn't play anybody and beat up on bad quarterbacks, beat up on and got on a run. That's kind of what Washington did in 2020. Eagles had a better record, but it was the same principle.
You're talking about Georgia. They got another Georgia player, Nakobe Dean. They got him in the 3rd round. And you bring up the Georgia players, and obviously I'm in Alabama, watch a lot of SEC football. I kind of am curious how a lot of the Georgia players – you talking about Jordan Davis didn't play every down? A lot of the Georgia players didn't. And a lot of that's because they were blowing other teams out. Mm-hmm. I just kind of wonder how these guys are going to do once they look and say, oh, no, I have to play it until the 4th quarter in a lot of these games.
Nakobe Dean falling to where he did shocked me because he was amazing. He's an amazing player.
Yeah, that surprised me. I mean, the measurables. Sometimes with the NFL draft, it crashed my head. Did you see the guy play? I mean, what he did when he was on the field. I mean, right. I think sometimes look, those guys get paid to do that. I'm not getting paid to do it, but I'm just looking at a guy that watches the games on Saturdays. Nakobe Dean was always involved. One of the leaders of that defense with a lot of guys that could be leaders, and he was one of the guys on that team. So it just was shocking how he fell when you see what he did on Saturdays. I mean, he was incredible every single game. Mm-hmm. So now we get to the Washington Commanders, and I want to ask you, for one, are you used to saying that name yet?
No.
What was your thoughts on the name? The Commanders when they announced they were going to go with that. It's kind of, I'll give my opinion, I'll let you give yours. I felt like it was kind of bland, generic. It was a safe name. I was kind of hoping they go with something with hogs in it, represent the fans. But what was your thoughts when they announced they were going to be now the Washington Commanders?
I thought it was. I thought, and I still think it's a little bit of a corny name. Do I think it's the worst possible name that they could have picked? No, but. And I think it's going to be one of those. And I know some of the players were, when they talked about the name beforehand, Chase Young was when Commanders was a possibility, he kind of laughed at it. But once they saw the uniforms and the logo and everything, I think the players were like, it's more important. The logo and the uniforms are way more important than the name, because it's for them. They're branded around Washington. That's what they're branded around, and Commanders is just the nickname, and they think that once they start winning, whenever that may be, that the name will be something people can get used to. And there's just so much negativity around the team. I mean, for the past many years, I mean, especially right now with the
Yeah.
owner, a lot of negativity.
Yeah, Daniel Snyder. I had a little bit there on my notes. Wasn't going to get into too much with him. I know losing record as the owner. I mean, I guess I'll just ask this for Washington fans: how excited would they be if they could finally just have a different owner, a different direction of the franchise? Because that's got to be a hard part for anybody that's a Washington football fan. Is that Daniel Snyder, the off the field, the team has not lived up to expectation. I mean, this is a proud franchise. I mean, I think a lot of people in the last 20 years, maybe the younger generation does not realize, the Washington football team franchise, what they did in the 80s with Joe Gibbs, just the tradition for what they did, won 3 Super Bowls. I think that's one thing that bothers me about it, because I love the history of the NFL. And I know Washington is a major player in that. But since Daniel Snyder's been the owner, they have not been that.
Before he took over in 1999, they were one of the 5 flagship franchises in the NFL, and what he's done in 23 years to dismantle, he's killed the love of this franchise with so many people. I mean, it's honestly, when you talk to so many people, it's depressing to see how much that team meant to the fans in the region, not just Washington, but the entire region. Now Baltimore's in town. Obviously, they were in town 3 years when Snyder took over, but it was still Washington's area. Since then, they're Maryland is all Ravens fans now mostly, and Washington, they're just trying to preserve Washington, Northern Virginia, and even that is hard to do now because everybody hates Daniel Snyder, and the problem is if they eventually get rid of him or he chooses to sell, which I never see happening. Is it too late, or are the fans just going to be like, apathy set in a long time ago, and it's just hard to see that getting that back.
Yeah, I hope, Duke. I think the NFL will be a better place if they are a competitive, matter at the end of the year, top franchise. Now you do have a new quarterback, Carson Wentz, traded from the Colts. Carson Wentz is just an interesting guy, an interesting study, I think, at the quarterback position, just because we look back he has not been the same really since 2017. When he blew out his knee against the Rams that year, he would have been the MVP. He was, I won't say he would have been. He was a leading candidate to be MVP that year. The year the Eagles won the Super Bowl with Nick Foles, which that's always I think a shadow that follows Carson Wentz around. He's just not been the same since, and a lot of times it feels like maybe he takes chances he shouldn't. I think it was a little bit too harsh that he got blamed for the Colts falling apart at the very end of the season last year and did not make the playoffs. But I mean, he can be good at times. 27 touchdowns, 7 interceptions last year, 62% completion percentage, a little over 3,500 yards passing. Yeah, he has the turnover issues, but he's not a bad quarterback. Just what is your look with Carson Wentz and his fit, and just Washington going out and getting him?
When I first heard of the trade, I was shocked. I was like, this is not really happening. And then, as I studied him more, going back and watching him some, and just kind of hearing what people said about him, teammates said about him, not what these people in the media who always seem to have an agenda, some of them, but then I realized, he wasn't as bad as they say. That performance in week 17 and week 16, they weren't good, but the team wasn't really good either, the entire team. But he was bad. His biggest issue is his decision making. The talent's always been there, but he tries to just do crazy stuff, and he puts the ball in jeopardy. You look at his numbers last year; he didn't turn the ball over a lot, but there was a lot of plays that should have been turnovers too. But when you look at his entire season, he wasn't that bad. He deserved more time there. I think it was an issue, which I guess you would call a political issue between him and the owner. Not so much between Wentz and him, but with the owner. That I think Frank Reich would have loved to have kept Carson for another year and to see what he could have done in his second year there. But the owner stepped in late in the year and said it's not going to happen. And this is coming from people in Indianapolis. It was more of an owner-driven issue than it was a performance issue. And Now, that's not saying he's going to go out in Washington, throw 40 touchdowns and lead them to Super Bowl. I don't believe that, but I do believe he takes a lot of flack that's kind of unnecessary, and it seems like a lot of people enjoy, like him and Kirk Cousins. Everybody enjoys seeing them fail, and I just don't quite understand it. I know why Washington fans have issues with Kirk Cousins, and I get that part, but he's still the best quarterback they've had here in a long time. But that's beside the point. But it's just like people enjoy seeing Carson Wentz, so they can say "I told you so" in the end. So it's you kind of root for the guy to see him have success.
And I kind of wonder too if some people, like I mentioned, they look at what he was in 2017, and everybody I think is holding him to that standard. Which, there's quarterbacks that can keep that standard. He's probably not going to be a top 5 quarterback, but maybe top 10, top 12. I think that's another thing with him. I just from an outsider looking in, that there's this expectation. Well, why can't you get back to that? Which that was a really good quarterback, but maybe that's not who he is. Maybe he's somewhere in the middle, which I think that's not a bad thing.
Right. I think that's where we're at with him. Is he's never going to reach 2017 again. But if he's a fringe top 10 quarterback, you win with those guys.
Yeah.
You make the right moves around them, and I think there are some good pieces around them. I mean, last year at this time, everyone was talking about how good the entire roster was outside of quarterback. They were just hoping Fitzpatrick would hold it together and lead them to the playoffs, and everything fell apart last year. But there are some good pieces to the roster. There's some issues that two positions I worry about. Linebacker, they didn't address the linebacker position. I like Cole Holcomb a lot. Jamin Davis was a little bit of I'm not going to call him a bust yet. He was out of position. That's on the coaches for drafting him to play a position he wasn't capable of playing really at this level. And then they should have went out and got a veteran and just didn't do it. And I think they lost a lot at the defensive tackle position, losing Tim Settle, Matt Ioannidis, and they got Fedarian Mathis. But they need one more veteran body in there behind Allen and Payne, because you're one injury to Jonathan Allen or Darian Payne away from just being really bad on the defensive tackle position. I think Chase Young's going to have a really good year this year. I think Montez Sweat will have a really good year. I think they could both get double-digit sacks. It's that time for him. I think Chase is motivated, and we know he's got the talent. We know he works hard. The secondary has some issues, but if that defensive line plays to its capability, that secondary is going to be pretty good because that covers a lot of flaws.
Okay, this may come off, and defense, I saw up front, they should be really good. They have a lot of talent there. I was going to ask you this as the person that covers this franchise. And I understand the fascination because this school has a lot of good players that come out every year. But, man, does Washington have a fascination with Alabama players?
They do, and they like Ohio State a lot too.
Those are two good programs to pick players from. I was just looking at it because, of course, you mentioned Darian Payne and Jonathan Allen. You've got Fedarian Mathis coming in, and then on offense, you did draft Brian Robinson too at running back.
And you got Cam Sims as well, and you had Landon Collins. So yeah, they always had a few Virginia Tech guys too. They weren't the upper level stars like the Alabama and the Ohio State guys are, but they always had. Last year you had Kendall Fuller and Tim Settle and Logan Thomas, and Joey Sly and Brian Johnson. There was like 5 Hokies there last year, so they always kind of to stick to a few schools to stack the roster with. So,
hey, if Carson Wentz doesn't work out, maybe we can trade up and just go get Bryce Young in the draft next year. So there you go. Then you'll be set.
You never know.
Yeah, you never know. You never know that thing's gonna work out. So we've touched on all these teams in this division, the NFC East. So for you, what is the rankings here, or 1 through 4? How do you see this division going this season?
Well, there's never a repeat winner in this division. I mean, you go back almost 20 years. I mean, it's crazy, and a different team emerges every year. This year, though, I think the Cowboys are going to repeat this year, but I don't think they're going to be as good as they were last year. But I think everybody else in the division is going to step up a little bit better this year. I think the division is going to be a lot tighter, but I still think Dallas is the best team. I think Philadelphia will be second. I think Washington comes in third, and I think the Giants finish last. But the Giants are going to be some team they're not a joke anymore, like that game last year where the old Georgia quarterback that was I don't think they're going to be an embarrassment this year. So I think it's going to be a much better division. But I think the order is Dallas, Philly, Washington, and New York.
I agree with you, but I think that they were 7-10 last year with Taylor Heineke as quarterback, and that's not a shot at him or not any disrespect. But if Carson Wentz plays to the level that maybe we thought a top 10, top 12 quarterback, maybe they do jump to, because the Eagles do have some issues there as well. You know, they were close with the Cowboys when they played them last year. I mean, both those, not the second one, the first game where they almost came back and beat them. The other game I know was a blowout, but they were tight with the Cowboys. I think maybe in their mind they believe they know they can play with them, and like we said, the Cowboys are not going to be as good this year on paper. So Carson Wentz, if he does play well, doesn't get turnover prone a little bit too much there, I think they could finish second there. But
if they stay, I think a lot of people underrate what the Commanders have on offense. Terry McLaurin just re-signed, who's a bona fide top 10 guy. I don't care what anybody says. Jahan Dotson is going to be one of the steals. And when you talk about these other receivers, nobody talks about him, and he's going to be really good. Mm-hmm. Curtis Samuel comes back healthy. You got a top 3 right there with tons of speed, and McLaurin and Dotson can dictate coverage. It's going to be really good. Carson's going to have no excuses if his guys are healthy. And then in the backfield, you got McKissick, Gibson, and Robinson. All 3 of those guys bring different skill sets to it. And Logan Thomas is back at tight end. And, offensive line, they lost Sheriff, and then they cut Eric Flowers. They signed Trey Turner and Andrew Norwell, two good veterans who there's not going to be no drop. There's not going to be a drop off there. Sheriff's the best player of all 4 of them, but he wasn't worth Washington paying $18 million a year to a 31-year-old guard who misses 6-7 games a year. So they improved by not paying that, by paying him top end money again. They're better off.
Yeah, so it's going to be interesting with this division, and we established they are not the worst division in the league. That's the AFC South, so it's going to be interesting when the week when I get to them. But Bryan, I appreciate you coming on. I told you 25 minutes. We've gone over 30 minutes. I'm very bad about doing that, but hey,
that's good.
It's the podcast. It's better podcast better than radio, where you don't have to worry about hitting them breaks. You don't have them time constraints like you would on radio. But if people wanted to follow you online, where can they find you and all the work you're doing?
They can find me on Twitter at Bryan, BRYAND Manning at Twitter. And then they can find me, my work over at Commander's Wire on the USA Today SMG Network. And also for Gobbler Country, covering Virginia Tech over at SB Nation.
All right. Sounds good, Bryan. But anyways, I appreciate the time, and I look forward to talking to you again sometime down the road.
Thanks, Phillip.